What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the JUICEreacts video. In today's video, we're going to be reacting to part 2, or our part 2, of the video that is the SCP Explained, a modern introduction to SCP Foundation by the Vulcan. If you haven't seen part 1, definitely go check that out. But before we jump into this, I have some very interesting information that I just found out about. So for those of you that don't know, that don't come to the live streams or haven't even known about my content for a while, I am somebody that has aspirations of being a filmmaker. I want to make short films, I want to make blockbuster films, and I'm also a writer. I'm currently writing my own comic books. I'm actually raising funds to get into the production of my comic book. But with that, I'm currently working on a short film with a friend of mine, and I just found out, because I was telling him, I was like, dude, I just started checking out this fandom called SCP, and you gotta check it out. And when I was telling him about it, he told me he knows the person that created SCP Dollhouse, and that was my first reaction on SCP. So, small freaking world that my friend that I'm working on a short film with actually knows the guy that did SCP Dollhouse. Just wanted to throw that out there because I thought it was hella interesting. It was the first video I reacted to. So yeah, and of course, before we jump into this, if you guys are watching this channel and you haven't hit that subscribe button, what are you doing? 90% of you guys, come on. But anyways, guys, let's check this out right now. Okay, so I think where we left off last time, we were right on the proposals for SCP-1. And I think I guess he's gonna get into them right now.
Humanity for the rapture or apocalypse. SCP-1 is the angel guarding Eden.
Oh.
Number 2, Dr. Mann's proposal. The first and only natural anomaly was a spiral path in New York. A group of ambitious scientists experimented with reality using this as the thread and created every single other anomaly in the database.
Oh, that's
Number
interesting.
3, S. Andrew Swan's proposal.
I like the angel one, though.
The SCP Foundation is aware of its fictionality. They are currently discussing ways to kill their authors.
I don't like that one.
Number 4, Rojit's proposal. Keter-class anomalies are an inherent part of the universe and can be contained using each other. By releasing all Keter-class anomalies, the universe can be manually restructured. Number 5, Twisted Gear's Cactus proposal.
Huh? Cactus?
SCP-1 is one manifestation of the mechanical god worshipped by a clockwork cult, which wreaked havoc on the world before the military destroyed it.
I don't know.
And finally, Number 6, Kaladin's proposal. Humanity was originally a slave race whose suffering was harvested to create utopia on another planet. We escaped and then tried to cloak ourselves. The cloak failed, and our masters are trying to bring us home. It's my personal suggestion that you don't start with SCP-1.
I like the first two.
The proposals are usually quite complex and require some knowledge of Foundation lore, which is either played with, expanded on, or subverted. Read conventional SCPs before you take the number 1 deep dive.
Okay. Good to know.
Special classifications, -EX, -J, and -ARC. There are other types of documents that use the basic SCP format and style, but utilized in a different way. This allows different stories with more diverse tones and themes to be told. The SCP-EX classification designates an SCP that is no longer considered anomalous. It is explained. The object or phenomenon in question still exists, but the Foundation has deemed it to be an acceptable part of consensus reality. Or it was a giant fake-out, or it turned out to be just a new scientific discovery. An SCP-J is a joke SCP, a parody SCP in a sense. Joke SCPs are explicitly non-canon, using the SCP format to joke around or make fun of something for the benefit of the reader. They may riff on in-universe tropes like overwrought security, over-the-top containment, cold posting, or bad original characters. Or they may parody things like food poisoning, bad drivers, easily angered people, or that one movie. They may even make fun of the elements in the other popular SCP canons. Ultimately, a joke SCP is just a way to make the reader laugh. If a joke SCP is not well written and very funny, it'll be downvoted. And finally, we...
Downvoted? So is this like... Can you vote on... Like, how... Feel free, I mean, maybe he's going to explain it, but how do you get onto the website? Is everything on the website, or do they also have like a Reddit that you post on the Reddit and that whatever gets upvoted and gets downvoted gets put on the SCP? I don't really know. I'm just kind of spitballing here. But how does the downvoting work?
We have SCP ARC, archived SCPs. These are usually legacy pages from the very old days of the site, when standards were low and the mass edit had not been conducted yet. While most of these SCPs were deleted, some of them needed to have text archives due to their usage in other tales or still existing SCPs, or because they were historically important. ARCing is no longer in use since the opening of Series 2, 3, and 4. And you will most likely never need to read one of these.
Why?
Tales, canons, and collaborative logs. Tales are how the Foundation universe gets deepened and extended beyond the limits of the simple SCP file. It allows authors to tell stories where groups or people can interact with each other in the SCP universe, to expand on ideas already created in SCPs, or just, to write a prose. Some authors may also turn their tales into a series, usually if they have a cohesive idea in mind, or if it gets really popular. Notable series include There Is No Anti-Memetics Division, The Cool War, The Lombardi Tales, Tales of Mr. Collector, and Pitch Haven. You can find Tales in the top-rated Tales archive as submissions to a themed contest or by trawling around and finding recommendations. You can also, as we'll soon learn, read the tales in a canon. A canon is your own set of assumptions about the tone, setting, and dynamic of the universe. Each of the canons in the Canon Hub is a wildly different set of assumptions based off the baseline SCP Foundation. Think of them as mega tale hubs, or parallel universes, or self-contained cinematic universes for authors to play in. Here are 5 notable canons. Broken Masquerade, a world where the Foundation's existence is known by everyone. Resurrection, a deliberate attempt to resurrect the action-orientated SCP Dr. Crazy Days of Series 1, in which an MTF composed of anomalous humans is formed. Third Law, a pulpy sci-fi paratech world dominated by the machinations of Prometheus Labs and Anderson Robotics. Rat's Nest, the military killed God, and the Foundation is covering it up. Reality is slowly unraveling and falling apart.
That's interesting.
The Gulf, small-scale poignant series set in the southern United States, usually having a restful, mysterious feel, and featuring religious symbolism and unconventional types of media.
Yeah.
A number of pages on the site are tagged as collaborative. Collaborative logs or pages can be edited and added to by anyone, although some quality oversight still exists. This is a good way to get your creative chops and contribute whilst not taking the plunge of writing an SCP. The 3 main collaborative pages exist as lists of mini SCPs, very small-scale items or phenomena that don't need to have a narrative, but still need to be unique, appropriate, and interesting. They are Log of Anomalous Items. The SCP Foundation has discovered a substantial number of items which are simply too useless to merit further attention. This document lists those items which have prompted some curiosity. Log of Extranormal Events. This page is to document anomalous events that have attracted the Foundation's interests, but occurred too briefly for the Foundation to secure or contain them. And finally, Log of Unexplained Locations. This page is to be devoted to the documentation of low-threat anomalous locations which have been discovered by the SCP Foundation over the years. There are a number of other collaborative pages, usually SCP supplements or logs. Keep in mind that guidelines for contributions still apply though, and if your edition is deemed to be below standard, it'll probably be removed.
Interesting.
Groups of interest. The
I want to see how these things are rated.
Fish in the anomalous sea. Other organizations, collective, and groups exist that utilize or create paranormal phenomena for their own purposes. Some are associates of the Foundation, others are rivals to it. Many of them quietly pursue their own interests, while a great many of them fall on the lines of good and or evil. The vast majority simply have a goal in mind that's somewhere in between. Here are 7 notable groups of interest. Are We Cool Yet? A collection of an artists, usually
Cool?
producing surreal and disturbing works of art. Their pieces are designed to have maximum impact and are usually lethal in some way.
Oh yeah, and artists
Chaos
sound
Insurgency,
interesting.
a rogue cell of the Foundation that uses terrorist means to steal and repurpose powerful anomalies to gain control over nations and conduct unethical experiments using them. The Church of the Broken God, a widespread cult believing in a clockwork god
Oh yeah,
who
yeah.
is broken into pieces all over the world. Dr. Wondertainment,
Oh, it's interesting.
an individual or company that makes anomalous artifacts that are supposed to be children's toys. The Serpent's Hand, a small organization headquartered in an interdimensional library, believing in anomalous rites and the normalization of the paranormal and magical. Marshall, Carter, and Dark, a corporation that buys and sells anomalous items for the benefit of the super rich.
That's cool.
Global Occult Coalition, or the GOC, a massive military organization under control of the UN, using technology and force to destroy the extra-normal wherever they find it. Many groups also have their own form of documentation, similar to an SCP. On the Wiki, they are called GOI formats, and they are stories told from a different perspective than the Foundation. For more information, visit the Groups of Interest page,
I
as
wanna
well
check that
as
out.
the ongoing Groups of Interest overview and guide on the SCP Declassified subreddit. Beyond the main site, you can find stories and SCPs to read even beyond the classifications and places I've already detailed.
Okay, here we
In this
go.
final section, I present other outlets of writing associated or tied to the SCP Wiki that you can also look into.
It's got to be Reddit,
Firstly,
right?
a great place for you to discover lesser known but very well written tales and SCPs are in the contest archive. For example, SCP-1000, 2000, and 3000 contests all have SCPs themed around urban legends, sci-fi, and horror, respectively.
Yeah.
You have the Short Works contest, and the D-Class contest mentioned earlier, and the
I need to check
History
those out.
contest for both tales and SCPs. Then there are the gigantic, multi-part Mobile Task Force contest and Groups of Interest contest, and then the Dystopia and Reimagining contests, and so forth. There's so much to find. The Wanderer's Library is set in the mysterious, ancient, magical Library of the Serpent's Hand. It includes prose pieces and poetry set in the SCP universe, but focused on evoking a sense of wonder, of the extraordinary and fantastical. Quote, a sense that there is a larger world beyond the one we know. In the world of the library, these wonders are hidden, but never truly far away. But never forget that this is a wilder world than our own, and it's never entirely safe, either. And finally, we have the international foreign SCP branches. There's French SCPs, Russian SCPs, Japanese SCPs, and a whole bunch more. Each brand has their own set of SCPs, many of which have extremely creative and diverse ideas. If you're looking for
That's
more
pretty cool.
SCPs to read, this might be a place to find cool concepts. And if you don't know a foreign language, the main SCP-INT Wiki Hub has translations of some of them.
That's cool.
This was entirely written by Reddit user Modulum83 over on the SCP Declassified subreddit. All links will be in the description.
Knew there had to be one.
If you enjoyed it, give Modulum83 some praise in the comments section for writing something I couldn't write myself. I hope it answered
Congratulations,
most of your
Modulum.
questions about who we are and what we do, and that it convinced you to take a dive and become part of the universe and the community.
Okay, so I think that's it. I don't know if I'm missing anything. It's just a lot of Patreon stuff at the end of this. But yeah, there it is, SCP Foundation. So I need to check out the wiki. Okay, so we're on the wiki page here, and they said, of course, 1 through 6, or they're on 7? Or no, 1 through 6. So this is all the way to 1,000. So, you guys informed me on the last video that I had the assumption that this access denied thing was ones that haven't been filled yet. which is pretty awesome. Now, it's funny because every time I've been telling people about SCPs, for some reason, the number 5,433 has been popping into my head a lot. So I kind of want to just see what that is. 33 is access denied. Is that telling me I should write a story and put it in here? Although I'm not, as I would need to be way more versed in the lore before I even attempted writing anything, but that'd be kind of cool. I'm very interested. I didn't even look at all this other stuff, like the tales and the canon. It's just, it seems like a big undertaking, much like 40K is, but I find it hella interesting. I love the idea that you can just kind of write your own thing, and maybe if it's good enough, it gets put into here, and then it kind of just lives in the world. So, the thing I'm interested in is, like, how does one get accepted into SCP? Is it in a Reddit? Does your story need to, pop off a lot of buzz? Like, are we saying that all of these are just badass stories? Or it's just they were interesting enough to get into the SCP? Like, I'm very interested on that aspect, because I haven't, from what I've been learning, I haven't learned any of that. For the most part, I am loving this. It's just it seems so creative. I love the idea of a community getting together and building a world, because, I feel like, for me, I am a big comics fan, but for me to, like, get into DC to possibly write a story for DC, I need to make my own comics, and I need to get popular enough to actually get noticed, to get it, it's a whole, like, stepping ladder, just like trying to get to Hollywood to make movies. But in this, it just seems like if your story's good enough and the community loves it, boom, you're in, which I find fascinating and amazing. So, yeah, I don't know, this is hella intriguing. I'm having a blast. So now that I've watched this video, where do I go next? Because 40K always tells me you should check this out, Where should I go from here? Should I watch another thing like Dollhouse? Should I continue learning? Where do you guys think is the next thing that I should watch? Also, I like that there's a jokes section. I want to find some of the funny stuff in SCP as well, but I don't know if I should check out more lore stuff. Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to be it for me. Of course, if you haven't come over to the Twitch channel, you should definitely come hang out. We will be streaming later today, so definitely come hang out if you want to do that. Just go hit that follow button, turn on notifications for any time we go live. Of course, if you want some stupid content, you can check out the TikTok. And as always, if you haven't subscribed to this channel, I don't know why, 90% of you haven't. If you haven't subscribed, do hit that subscribe button, give the video a thumbs up because it helps out the channel. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, I am your host, JUICEbox. Remember to wake up in the morning and ask yourself something. That's my daily dose of juice. See you guys next time.